Okay, so I'm often asked by my students and quite often see online questions about what book should I get? I want to learn sociology. What do I read first? So I've pulled out some books from my bookcase and I'm going to go through some examples of things that you should read, as well as maybe point out some things that you probably shouldn't. So we'll start with textbooks. Textbooks are really good for organizing and categorizing content. So they're kind of good at giving us fitting different sociologists into particular categories. And they're also really good at helping us think about particular problems, particular strengths, and such that we get with certain kinds of sociological theory. I'll move on to that in a minute. I'm not going to go over these books in too much detail. I might talk a little bit about some of them, but I'll save that for a different video. So first of all, we've got Howell, Boss and Holborn, Sociology, Themes and Perspectives. So we often refer to this as the Blue Bible. It's really, really excellent. It's actually written for A-levels, which is the year and 2 years before university in the UK. But it's just so well written and it has so much in it. Give you a kind of quick look at what some of the chapters are. Really good, something to keep in mind with this book. So this is the 7th edition. And if I go find the beginning of one of the chapters. In the 7th edition, there we go. So chapter 1, social stratification. It's got a little content page at the beginning of each chapter, which is really helpful. Not all of the editions have that. The 7th does. I think the 8th and later don't have that. So I, given the choice, will always go with the 7th edition. Well worth picking this book up. Doesn't matter what level you're at. I imagine most people watching this are just beginning sociology, but Howell, Boss and Holborn, really excellent book. Anthony Giddens, this is just called Sociology, another really good textbook. Giddens is a real sociology heavyweight. He shows up everywhere. You will read Giddens. If you're studying sociology, you're going to read Giddens, but this is one of his textbooks. It's really written for undergraduate level and above. I found both of these books useful in my degree, in my master's degree as well. So this book is worth picking up, but if you're just starting, I would probably just go with Howell, Boss and Holborn for now. I wouldn't worry too much about Giddens, but this is probably a good one to have on your bookshelf if you can afford it. There's another couple of trickier textbooks here. So a couple more by Giddens. I wouldn't really recommend them. Not because they're bad books, just because essentially they're beyond the level you're likely to be at. Now, there's 2 books here. There's Classical Sociological Theory and Contemporary Sociological Theory, both of them by the same authors, Craig Cohoon et al. Classical sociological theory, as the name implies, deals with older sociology, and contemporary sociological theory deals with more recent sociology, but it's still got quite a bit of older stuff in there. Both of them are pretty decent books, and I would recommend them. Just one more to mention, Down to Earth Sociology by Henslin. Now, this is basically full of introductory reading, so it's essentially a reader. What that means, if you don't know, is that it takes extracts of really important sociology and sort of condenses them down, just takes the really important bits and gives you something to read there. It's really important in sociology to read. The difficult thing is that it's not easy to read sociology, at least not all the time, and I'll give you some examples of that as we're looking through some of these books. So a reader like this can be really helpful because it just takes out some of the really important bits about certain types of certain particular concepts that you might need to know about. So I'd recommend a book, or any other kind of reader that does that is worth picking up. Now, if you were to put a post on the internet, on Reddit or something, asking which sociology book should I buy, you probably would be recommended Durkheim. I would recommend you read Durkheim as well, but with the caveat that if you've never read sociology before, Durkheim can be quite hard to read. I would recommend this particular book, The Rules of the Sociological Method. I've also brought down Suicide, which is Durkheim applying his ideas to a particular issue, in this case, suicide. There's also the division of labour in society and the elementary forms of religious life. There's other books and that he's written, but these are the ones that are kind of the kind of crux, sort of core of his work. I would probably just stick with this, and even then, I wouldn't even recommend that you read the whole thing. I would locate the section on social facts if I were you, and wrap your head around that. You will also find that in some good readers as well. So you wouldn't necessarily need to buy this particular book, but it's a good one to have on your bookshelf. Karl Marx. So at the top here, I've got the Communist Manifesto, and if you're going to read some Marx and you've never read Sociology and you've never read Marx before, I probably would recommend the Communist Manifesto. It's a political pamphlet, essentially. So take that for what it is, but it gives you a good introduction to what Marx is thinking and what he has to say. There's also this book here, Capital, the original Das Kapital, written in German. Capital's a good book. It's one of those that if you are seriously going to study sociology over the long term, you probably will need to read Capital within the first year, so get it. But start with the Communist Manifesto. One thing I'll kind of add before I move on to Weber, this is why textbooks can be useful, right? Because both Durkheim and Marx are what we call structuralist sociologists. So they look at society as being an overarching structure. What a textbook like Sociology or Sociology Themes and Perspectives is good at doing is kind of giving you the background on what we mean by structuralist sociology. Durkheim is what we'd call a consensus structuralist, and Marx is what we'd call a conflict theorist. But they're both looking at the overall structure of society. And whilst they sort of do explain that, a textbook is better at kind of giving you that like really nice categorized, organized way of understanding what we mean by that. And it means that you go into reading someone like Durkheim or Marx with an idea of what they're useful for, what they're not so good at, what common criticisms are, and so on. So you read these things in tandem. You if you read Rules of the Sociological Method, you would probably be rereading Giddens' Sociology or Harold Boston Holborn or something sort of alongside it. A really good thing about something like Down to Earth Sociology is that it doesn't just give you the readings, but it also gives you sort of an explanation and a context and a background and so on, which can really help. Max Weber, Economy and Society. I wouldn't recommend you attempt to read this as a beginner. But again, like some degree courses probably will get you to try and read this within the first year. But it's good to have a bit of background first. And again, I would, have some kind of accompanying text, a textbook or something to help you understand. Try and wrap your head around what Weber's trying to say before you go and read Weber himself, because it could be quite a challenge. Again, good to have on your bookshelf, but not necessarily something you have to read straight away. Arlie Hochschild is by far within my top 2 or 3 sociologists. I think she's fantastic. The Second Shift is definitely worth a read. So is The Managed Heart, and so is Strangers in Their Own Land. I've got a couple more books there as well, but I'll focus on these 3. Strangers in Their Own Land is, essentially all 3 of these books are seriously easy to read. They're really, really interesting. Hochschild is a feminist, essentially. She is quite influenced by Marx. She does say that in the beginning of The Second Shift. She's also quite influenced by Goffman, who we'll talk about in a minute. She talks about that too. But really, like, the strength of Hochschild, her ideas are great in the first place, but the way that she articulates what she's trying to say in her work, you're never under any illusion. You're never confused about what it is she's trying to say. It's always straight to the point. Very, very clear. She's not trying to hide behind anything. Really, really wonderful sociologist. She's still going as well. Goffman, alongside Hochschild, is my favourite sociologist, in sort of top 2 or 3. So we've got here Stigma, Asylums, Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Again, there's a couple more books here. This Communication Conduct in the Island Community, I'm pretty sure was his PhD thesis. But we'll focus on these three. They're the mainline Goffman. If you're going to start with Goffman, read The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. It's probably my favourite book, I think. Certainly up there. Again, quite clear, really easy to engage with. You can get this as an audiobook, which I think is brilliant. You can also get The Second Shift, and I'm pretty sure you can get Strangers in Their Own Land by Hochschild through or as an audiobook. So for some people that helps them. It does with me. It gives me just another way to engage with this stuff. So I find it really useful. There's no more of Goffman as an audiobook, but Asylums is a decent read, as is Stigma. These are both really, really good books, but I would start with Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. He moves beyond the ideas or beyond the framework that he sets himself in Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. He moves beyond that in later work, but it's kind of still there. He's using slightly different language, but to say effectively the same thing. Quite easy to read and engage with. It is a work of sociology. It's a technical academic piece of work. So treat it as such. Don't expect it to read like Harry Potter or something. But this is a nice easy book. Another example of a nice easy book to read. Howard Becker's Outsiders. Again, one of my favourite sociologists. He gets straight to the point. He's really trying to be clear. He's not hiding behind anything. Really excellent sociologist. There's also a book here, which you don't need to get this specific book, but Howard Becker's done quite a lot of work around writing in social science. And, if you're studying sociology or something, you need to learn how to write sociology. So it doesn't have to be this book, but it's probably worth picking something up. Freud, you don't need to read any Freud, but I got it here just to have a quick chat about it. If you do want to read some Freud, get something like Civilization and its Discontents, just because it's nice and small. Same thing with The Unconscious. Nice, short book. But the reason I'm mentioning Freud, because he's a psychologist, some kind. But he is cited, for example, quite a lot by Goffman and others. So if you understand Freud, then you're more likely to understand Goffman. You can read Goffman without really understanding Freud. You'll still get the point, but my point is that you'll understand it more deeply. And that goes with kind of all these books and any book that you read. Let's say you read The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life as your first book in sociology, and then you go read a bunch of this stuff that I'm showing you here and some other stuff as well, and you come back and you read Presentation of Self in Everyday Life again, you'll understand this book much more the second time because you've got all that context from the other work as well. So I'm just putting Freud here just because he's someone that was really important, particularly in the sort of early-ish sociology. Zygmunt Bauman, a legend of sociology, really. I'm in Leeds, in the UK. He lived and taught in Leeds for a very long time. He died only a few years ago, I think. So liquid times here. So Bauman has this kind of common theme in a lot of his work. He uses the term liquid. So society is becoming less solid. It's becoming more like a liquid. Again, I'll go over it in another video at some point. But we've got liquid times, globalization, liquid modernity. This is one of my favourites that he's done is liquid modernity. Thinking sociologically is a textbook, effectively. But if we go to page 5, there's a section, Sociology and Common Sense, and I strongly recommend that you read it. I read it as a student teacher, and it dramatically impacted on the way that I teach my students and the way that I explain sociology to people who don't have a background in it. Consuming life there, all about consumption, consumer society, and Modernity and the Holocaust, which is a really excellent book as well. I'd recommend reading anything by Bauman. It tends to use quite long sentences, which I find frustrating. You may or may not. Bit of Chomsky, get some Chomsky in you. Noam Chomsky is not really a sociologist, but there's a lot of crossover. worth a look. The really nice thing about Chomsky is he spends a lot of time engaging with sort of small YouTube channels and podcasts and radio shows and things, and it makes him very accessible. So you don't necessarily have to read a lot of Chomsky in order to understand Chomsky, although reading the work will always give you sort of more in-depth understanding. George Ritz's The McDonaldization of Society is a really excellent piece of work. He is essentially arguing that society is becoming more predictable and organized and efficient, a bit like a McDonald's. Really good piece of work. And it spurred a lot of kind of theories around things like education and family and media and so on. Michel Foucault, definitely get some Foucault in you. I wouldn't recommend either of these books. If anything, Madness and Civilization is worth reading. But for your first go at Foucault, I'd recommend Discipline and Punish because it's the easiest to engage with. When you read Foucault, something happens to you. Your outlook on the world changes because you read Foucault. I can't really explain it. If you read some Foucault, you'll understand what I mean. Read Discipline and Punish. It's a good piece of work. The Social Construction of Reality by Berger and Luckman is widely considered one of the most important works of sociology, up there with the likes of Durkheim and Marx and such. This is something I do recommend that you try and read, but with the caveat that it is going to be quite a hard slog if you don't have any background in sociology. They, for example, cite Durkheim quite a lot, especially towards the beginning, and whilst you probably will get the gist without knowing Durkheim, you'll understand it a lot more if you understand Durkheim. I really love this book, and it's again widely considered very important, so worth a read. Pierre Bourdieu, his Distinction, and there's another book here, Weight of the World. He's got loads of books out. If you're interested, there's a documentary on YouTube, I think it's on YouTube, called Sociology as a Martial Art, and they're following Bourdieu around. Now, Bourdieu's quite hard to read. Part of that is because he's French and he's writing in French, and so if you're like me and you're speaking English and only English, you're getting a translation. But man, his sentences are so long. I don't know why he writes sentences so long. There's some really interesting ideas in Bourdieu's work, so it's worth engaging with. But again, a little bit like with Weber, you might want to start out with your sort of textbook understanding and then move on to Bourdieu when you need to. Though if you find his ideas interesting, go and read Bourdieu. And then I just thought I'd also suggest, or just sort of encourage people. So this is an author, Aviatar Zerubbabel, and I really like Zerubbabel. Now, I appreciate, first of all, he writes these, mostly quite short books, which I like. I don't like, obviously if a book needs to be long, it needs to be long, but Zerubbabel seems to feel like he can get the point across a little bit quicker than most, with a little less slog, and I do appreciate that. Now he picks these. He was a student of Irving Goffman, and he picks these neat little general topics to look at. So, Hidden in Plain Sight is about the things that sort of are there, but we don't see them. He's done quite a bit of work about time, about the way we understand and sort of construct the idea of ancestry and relatives, about how things that we consider unremarkable are in fact remarkable. A Clockwork Muse. There's a book, hasn't made it down with me, I'm afraid, called The Elephant in the Room, which is probably my favourite by him. And The Elephant in the Room is about, if you think about most sociology is maybe about the things that people say, The Elephant in the Room is about the things that people don't say, the things we keep silent about. It's a really lovely piece of work, nice short piece of work, but really interesting. So that's it really. Make time for stuff you're interested in too. Don't just read sociology. Read some fiction. Especially if you read something like, 1984 or Animal Farm, you read something by George Orwell, that in itself is going to be useful. It's going to help you. So, Yeah, hopefully that's helpful in some way.